You wander into a city where the air itself feels like a heavy blanket, every breath carrying the faint, acrid temps of coal and metal. Merely walking down the street is already a hazard to your lungs. You drift with me through Victorian Britain, slipping into streets choked with carts, crowds, and smoke that never lifts. Somewhere in this haze, a child coughs and another, and another. It's not hard to imagine that if you'd been born a Victorian child, you likely wouldn't have lasted long. Now, settle in, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto a cobbled London street in the 1850s, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. Cold smoke clings to your clothes, slides down your throat, settles deep in your chest. Chimneys rise like a forest of brick around you, each puffing another dark ribbon into the sky. This is the proud height of the Industrial Revolution. Britain runs on coal the way your devices run on electricity. Every factory, every train, every hearth feeds the air with grit. You blink, but the haze remains a yellowish veil, as if the entire city were sealed inside a bottle of weak tea. Follow the clatter of wheels, and you'll find horse-drawn omnibuses vanishing into the fog. Locals call days like this pea soupers, because the air feels thick enough to eat with a spoon. Street lamps fade into ghostly halos just a few paces away. To your left, a woman mutters that this kind of fog is good for the complexion. Your quirky Victorian moment of the day. People genuinely convinced themselves that soot-laden air might brighten their skin. It sounds as absurd as claiming sugar prevents cavities. Children dart between carts and puddles, coughing, wiping their noses on their sleeves, never pausing. In Victorian Britain, roughly 1 in 3 children never reaches their 5th birthday. It's not one grand disaster, it's the slow grind of infections, contaminated water, overcrowded rooms, and air that gnaws at lungs still learning to breathe. Historians debate whether polluted air or infectious disease bears more blame. But for a mother watching her toddler gasp through a winter cough, the cause is everything at once spiled high and pressing down. Step into a small house off a narrow alley. A mother stirs a pot over a dying stove. The room is warm, but warmth comes with smoke that seeps into every corner. The window stays shut against the cold and street stench, so the air just swirls, thickens, and settles. Her baby sleeps in a wooden cradle, cheeks flushed, breath too quick. She pauses often to lean over, listening, judging that breath the way you might judge distant thunder. You feel the tension in her shoulders. A winter cough could mean a funeral by spring. Outside, factory whistles shriek. Mills burn coal day and night. Cross a bridge, and you'll see the river below, greasy with waste, flecked with ash. The water mirrors the sky. Both are murky gray, as if the city forgot what clarity looked like. For the first time, some doctors suspect this air is more than just unpleasant. They publish early reports linking foggy days to spikes in deaths from lung and heart disease. It's one of the first moments people begin to connect invisible pollution to overcrowded graveyards. You pass children playing beside a factory wall. One doubles over with a hacking cough. Another rubs red, irritated eyes. No one calls a doctor, it costs money. A grandmother shrugs and says, in so many words, that all children cough. In a world where tiny coffins are common, A persistent cough barely registers. Your modern instincts scream for clean air and better housing. But here, this is simply the price of progressive, slow, smoky sacrifice, paid first by the youngest lungs. At night, the city glows, faint orange gas lamps, battling a fog that refuses to lift. You stand at a street corner and listen. A church bell tolls for another funeral. A midwife hurries down a lane, shawl pulled tight, ready to usher another life into this world of soot and shadow. There's a sad rhythm to it all. Work, smoke, birth, death, repeat. Adults cough but carry on. Children, coffins, sometimes don't. Every choice feels rigged. Open the window, and cold, damp rushes in, risking chills. Pneumonia. Keep it shut, and smoke and stale breath build. She chooses the lesser danger, and hopes the odds favor her more than her neighbor. Occasionally, a breeze sweeps through, 4 minutes of clarity. You nearly feel euphoric at the thought of a deep, clean breath, like stepping into air conditioning after a humid summer day. Some Victorians grow proud of their smoky skies, claiming they prove national industry and success. Clear air, they say, is for sleepy places where nothing important happens. It's the 19th century version of bragging about all-nighters, as if exhaustion were a medal. The cruel irony: the city itself is nodding off, choked and wheezing, as you drift from the river and the factory roar. Your mind lingers on those fragile lungs, how the very first breaths of so many Victorian children are already laced with ash and peril. There's no single tragedy to point to, no dramatic collapse, just an atmosphere that presses down on every family, making motherhood feel like standing watch on a battlefield. Even on an ordinary Tuesday, you stand beside a narrow iron bed as a newborn blinks at the world. The room is small but full of sound: a kettle hissing, boots clattering outside, a distant clock chiming. The baby cries in at first, then stronger. Everyone exhales in relief. In Victorian Britain, every cry is a promise that this tiny chest is still moving. Look at the mother, pale with fatigue, but stroking her child's cheek, memorizing every feature. She knows, even if no one speaks it aloud, that this bundle lives in a dangerous world. In many 19th century British cities, more than 1 in 5 infants die before their first birthday. That's not rare, it's routine. The baby is swaddled tightly. Warmth feels like protection, especially in damp climates. But too many layers make breathing hard. People believe babies must be wrapped snugly, or their limbs will grow crooked. Superstition passed off as wisdom. You can almost imagine Victorian parenting blogs insisting that loose blankets cause lifelong deformities. She places the baby beside her to nurse close, comforting. But in crowded homes, it's perilous. Stories tell of infants smothered in the night deaths, recorded as overlaying. Historians still debate whether these were mostly accidents or, in desperate households, disguised infanticide. Either way, another small life vanishes into a short line in a parish register a few streets over. A wet nurse cradles a stranger's baby. Middle and upper class mothers often send infants out to nurse, partly to preserve their own health, partly because it's fashionable. For poor women, wet nursing is rare paid work, but it often means leaving their own babies with cheap cow's milk or worse. It's a grim trade, one child fed at the expense of another. In the corner, a bottle sits with a long, snake-like rubber tube, an early feeding device, clever in theory, deadly in practice. Milk curdles in the tube, bacteria bloom unseen. Number 1 can clean it properly. This innocent-looking gadget quietly helps fill cemeteries. Doctors will later call such bottles murder bottles, a phrase that sounds hyperbolic until you see the death rates. Then it feels chillingly literal. In a back alley, toddlers play in muddy streets. A child stoops to drink from a glittering puddle. There's no clean tap water, no knowledge of microbes. If it looks clear and doesn't smell, it must be safe. You know what lurks there: cholera, typhoid, dysentery, diseases that wither children in days. But for families sharing one pump with hundreds, there's no alternative. Inside another home, a baby sleeps in a drawer, pulled from a dresser, no cradle to afford them. It's more common than you'd think, even recommended as thrifty. Clever, yes, but the drawer sits near the floor, where cold, damp air pools. Not ideal for lungs already under siege. As children survive infancy, new threats emerge. Measles sweeps through alleys, sparing one child, taking another. Scarlet fever paints cheeks red and tongues bright. Diphtheria turns throats into sealed chambers. Doctors offer rest, hope, and foul-tasting tonics. A mother soothes her feverish child with stories of angels and gardens, whispering that heaven is the safest place away to keep breathing when the small body beside her finally stops. People speak of dead children in soft, dreamy terms: cherubs, buds plucked early. Memorial cards show pale, serene figures with folded hands and halos. Death is framed as an early bedtime, not a catastrophe, a shield against grief in a world where nearly every family has lost someone small. That's why mothers keep locks of hair or tiny shoes long after everything else is gone. Even in prosperous homes, nurseries filled with toys and white-painted furniture feel fragile. Curtains catch fire from candles. Prams roll too close to bolting horses. Relatives sneak rum into a fussy baby's milk to quiet it, making modern parents wince in horror from across time. Consumption tuberculosis steals breaths slowly from rich and poor alike. Affection for children grows across the century, but the ability to protect them lags behind. At markets, you hear gossip. Some say high infant mortality hardens mothers. Others insist loss makes every surviving child fiercely precious. Historians still debate whether Victorian parents loved less or loved differently, shaped by constant loss. Lullabies sound like spells against uncertainty. As night falls again, you feel how fragile each household is. Every baby is a question. Every cough might begin a story with no middle. Victorian mothers learn joy wrapped in warning. Love your child, but never forget how easily the world can take them. There's no rule saying they must live in dread, but reality enforces it every time another small funeral passes their door. You enter a cramped bedroom turned birth chamber. Curtains are half drawn, not for privacy, but to block drafts. A coal fire crackles in the grate. On the bed, a woman grips the sheets, breath shallow, knuckles white. Everyone knows this should be joyous, but the air feels like the tense silence before surgery. The midwife moves with calm precision, but her mouth is tight. She's delivered many babies and watched some mothers die within days. No one says dice roll, but you feel it. In parts of 19th century Britain, about 1 in every 100 births ends with the mother dead. That number seems small until you realize nearly every woman knows someone who never left that bed. Visitors are shooed away. Male relatives loiter in hallways, pretending to discuss weather while their thoughts cling to the sounds behind the door. Fathers pace, smoke, or bury their faces in their hands. You can almost hear the nervous joke. "I'm the one suffering," a timeless male refrain. Behind the door, blood, sweat, and the real possibility the baby will leave without its mother. Labor drags. The midwife checks and frowns. The baby isn't descending. No ultrasounds, no monitors, only hands and experience. If a doctor is called, he may arrive with gleaming forceps in a leather cast tools that can save or scar, depending on skill and haste. Historians still argue whether forceps saved more lives than they endangered in an era eager for medical authority. Water boils in a pot. Steam and hot metal fill the room. Cleanliness is valued in a basic way, but germ theory is still emerging. Hands that touched a sick patient might touch the birthing mother next. Instruments are wiped, not sterilized. Puerperal fever childbed fever haunts these rooms. A woman seeming to recover can die in days, burning with infection. In some hospitals, death rates are so high that women prefer giving birth at home even. In squalor, lion hospitals appear, offering charity births to the poor. But crowded wards and unclean hands turn them into danger zones. One doctor later proves that hand-washing with disinfectant slashes deaths. The idea seems obvious to us revolutionary then. Small superstitions linger. In some regions, windows stay shut during labor to keep out evil air. Others tuck charms, prayer cards, or ribbons under pillows. One woman insists on wearing her bonnet, convinced a covered head ensures smooth delivery on oddly cozy belief. Like lucky socks for exams, except the exam involves a placenta. Pain rises like floodwater. Before the late 19th century, relief is minimal alcohol, opium drops, distraction. Then chloroform arrives. A Scottish doctor pioneers its use in childbirth. Queen Victoria endorses it. Suddenly, painless birth becomes fashionable. Not everyone approves. Some clergy call it defiance of divine will. Others fear risks. But many women, weary of agony, simply say, "If it hurts less and I survive, I'm in." Hours blur. The midwife murmurs encouragement, wipes brows, snaps at fussing relatives. Warmed brandy may be offered to strengthen the mother, often just adding to the chaos. Broth simmers nearby, smelling better than the room. Phanelia, thin, furious cry. Relief floods every face like sunlight breaking storm clouds. The baby is swaddled, cord tied. Someone makes a quick sign of baptism, just in case. The mother murmurs, eyes closed, gratitude or exhaustion. You can't tell. The first crisis passes, but danger lingers. Postpartum bleeding, fever, mastitis. If all goes well, there are small celebrations, a gift for the midwife. Neighborly gossip, a special recovery gown. A silly nickname before the formal one is written, but jokes. Carrie nervous, adjust laughter, hurried, before fate notices happiness. Look at the mother, hair damp, body trembling. To her, childbirth isn't a statistic, it's the necessary act of building a family. Marriage often means repeated pregnancies. She may return to this bed again and again, each time wondering if she'll walk out. You find yourself in a gloomy hallway, carbolic acid, cigar smoke, and something suspiciously cabbage-like. A brass plaque marks a doctor's practice. Inside, he adjusts his waistcoat and smooths his whiskers, his facial hair radiating more confidence than his methods. In the consulting room, a mother sits with a pale child on her lap. Glass bottles line the walls, laudanum for pain, calomel for purging, tonics for weak nerves. The doctor listens briefly to the cough, then prescribes opium drops, trusted, effective, and quietly addictive. No one talks of addiction as we do. Relief now is all that matters. He picks up his stethoscope, a novelty some patients find theatrical. He listens to the child's chest, performing a gesture that feels modern. Yet he still believes in miasma. Bad air causes disease. Germs are entering the conversation, but slowly. Historians debate how quickly doctors accepted germ theory or clung to old ideas, while reality coughed in their faces. Across town, a midwife kneels by a birthing bed. Her tools, cloths, hands, herbs, maybe a bottle of spirits for courage. Trained through apprenticeship, not diplomas, she knows positions, turns, comfort. Some doctors respect her, others see her as outdated competition. The professionalization of medicine turns birth into a credential war, men with certificates versus women with centuries of experience. You overhear a doctor reassuring a father, "I can use forceps or induce labor if needed." He doesn't mention his instruments aren't truly sterilized, just wiped and tucked into leather cases that hide invisible danger. Puerperal fever often follows such help. At the chemist, colorful bottles promise miracles, soothing syrup for fussy babies containing morphine. Parents love the silence it brings, unaware of the risks. It's the 19th century equivalent of discovering your bedtime tea is 90% tranquilizer. Purges, blistering, bloodletting still practiced, based on the idea that illness must be driven out by making the patient feel worse first. The logic. If it tastes awful, it must work. In lying in hospitals, medical students move from bed to bed, eager to learn, but their unwashed hands carry death. Pioneers advocate hand washing. Others dismiss it as inconvenient or insulting. Antiseptic practices spread slowly, MESSILY. In the countryside, a village doctor trudges through rain to distant cottages, dedicated, but possibly carrying infection from his last patient. Mothers trust his learning, unaware that education without hygiene can spread as much as it cures. Faith and medicine blur. Doctors prescribe rest, air, and prayer together. A mother nurses her sick child, clutching a religious medal while spooning in tonic. Neither science nor faith has all the answers. Both are used in desperation. Smaller maternity homes offer private care for those who can pay. Nurses in crisp white scrub ventilate, monitor, turning cleanliness into ritual. But crowded wards remain grim, where mothers feel like data points, not people in a doctor's study. Books lie open, diagrams of pelvises, fever charts, symptom lists. The drive to understand is real. Vaccines for smallpox succeed. Public health reports track mortality, seeking patterns. Medicine slowly shifts from tradition to data, but the learning curve is paved with mothers' and children's bodies. Victorian Medicine is a double edge. It brings vaccines, sanitation ideas, organized care, and also addictive drugs, unsterilized tools, and infection-filled wards. For a mother, calling a doctor means inviting both hope and hazard. Progress and danger share the same black bag. You stand before a shop window, the glass fogged by breath and soot, another face, in a city where every breath is borrowed and every life balanced on the edge of smoke and survival. London drizzle beads on the window pane, and behind the glass lies a display that tightens your stomach. Tiny black gloves, somber ribbons, white fabric flowers, and mourning cards edged in black line the sill. On a lower shelf, a miniature coffin stands upright, polished to a muted gleam. The sign on the door reads simply, "Undertaker." The window might as well whisper that in this city, grief isn't just a feeling, it's a product line. You step inside, and the scent meets you first. Beeswax, fresh wood shavings, and a trace of tobacco lingering in the still air. Coffins of varying sizes lean against the walls like furniture in a showroom, some plain pine for families with little means, others dark, glossy, and fitted with brass for those who can afford dignity or demand it. The smallest are the hardest to look at. They resemble dollhouses, except, they're meant for children who never lived long enough to play with. The toys in the shop next door. The undertaker emerges from a back room, clothes neatly brushed, expression solemn but not sorrowful. His job demands calm precision. He measures grief in inches of wood and shillings of cost. For a child, he offers scaled-down services, a modest coffin, a brief procession, perhaps a simple hearse with a glass panel so passersby might glimpse the tiny casket within. By the mid-19th century, factories begin mass-producing coffin parts, standardizing even the final resting place. You run your fingers along the edge of a sample. The wood is smooth, impersonal. Some families pay extra to have their child's name carved on the lid or a Bible verse etched beside it. Others struggle to cover the base fee. Credit arrangements exist, quiet understandings that spare families the shame of a pauper's burial. Historians still debate whether undertakers exploited raw grief by upselling trinkets to heartbroken parents or merely met a genuine need. For families desperate to express love through tangible gestures, the truth likely lies tangled in both tenderness and commerce. In the corner, a tray holds small printed cards, funeral notices sent T. In the corner, a tray holds small printed cards, funeral notices sent to relatives and neighbors. For a child, the design often features a lamb, a broken blossom, or a tiny shoe. Nearby, boxes of funeral biscuits catch your eye. Simple, sweet cookies wrapped in paper printed with skulls or scripture. Guests receive them at services as edible mementos. You imagine chewing one while staring at a miniature coffin and decide. Victorian mourning rituals demand a kind of emotional multitasking few could sustain. Outside, wheels clatter on cobbles as a child-sized hearse passes, drawn by a single pony adorned with black plumes. Its glass sides reveal a white coffin nestled among flowers. Behind it, mourners walk with slow, measured steps. In many cities, funerals become public theater. Neighbors pause on stoops, lift hats, lower voices. Everyone knows, today it's someone else's child. Tomorrow, it could be theirs. You follow the procession to a cemetery on the city's edge. Here, mourning is etched in stone. Grand monuments rise over wealthy plots angels with outstretched wings, urns draped in marble cloth, weeping women, frozen mid-sob. Among them lie rows of small graves, clustered like a garden of lives cut short. Some headstones bear carved teddy bears, lambs, or the phrase "a bud plucked before it bloomed." Records show that in many urban burial grounds, during the 1800s, over a third of interments were children. The undertaker oversees the burial with practiced efficiency. The coffin is lowered. Ropes creak under weight. For an extra fee, families might hire professional mourners, singers, or choose a more ornate coffin lining. Nearby shops rent or sell black mourning garments so even the poorest can appear properly. Attired, though rarely for church, more often for appearances. The line between sincerity and performance blurs. You can almost hear a draper reminding a customer, the deeper the crepe trim, the more respectable the sorrow appears. Elsewhere, in a dim workshop, a craftsman polishes jet jewelry bracelets, brooches, necklaces glinting under lamplight. Some pieces contain tiny compartments holding a lock of the deceased's hair. Mothers wear these for years, fingers brushing them absently as if checking that memory hasn't faded. Hair jewelry can be homemade or store-bought, simple or elaborate, but always intimate, more unsettling than any headstone, because it clings to the living body like a private shrine. Printed guides to proper mourning circulate widely, prescribing how long to wear black for different relations. For a spouse, rules are strict, often a year or more in full mourning before shifting to grays or lavenders. For children, recommendations vary. Some manuals suggest specific phases with designated fabrics. Others imply infant death should be mourned briefly, as if small lives demand smaller grief. Historians still question whether these timetables offered comfort by giving shape to chaos or trapped parents in rhythms that ignored how grief truly moves in crowded markets. Stallholders sell cheap wreaths and black ribbons to families who can't afford full funeral services. There's grim ingenuity here. Homemade wreaths from whatever blooms are available. Painted cardboard plaques mimicking carved stone. Children helping twist wire and arrange petals, participating in rituals that may one day be used for them. The market bustles with life while quietly preparing for death, even in remote villages. The local carpenter often doubles as undertaker, his livelihood tied to mortality rates. There's an uneasy arithmetic in every condolence. When epidemics strike, his orders surge, then vanish. A dark joke circulates. Want to know where disease is headed? Watch how much would the coffin maker buys. It's the kind of gallows humor that only arises where death is a familiar neighbor, not a stranger. As evening settles over the cemetery, low voices and crunching gravel fill the air. A mother lingers by a tiny grave, fingertips tracing letters on cold stone. Around her, the machinery of mourning stands silent. The coffin, the marker, the black dress, the jet brooch at her throat. Each item honors her child, yet each also represents money spent in a world where coin is scarce. For many Victorian mothers, mourning isn't just emotional, it's financial and social, too. A pressure to prove love through objects, ceremonies, and public displays. You take in the rows of small graves, the distant haze of smoke, the muffled clatter of city life. It becomes clear, in this world, grief is not only felt, it's itemized. Receipts, ledgers, invoices, death fuels an entire dichotomy. The businesses that serve it offer real solace. Yes, but they also commodify sorrow, turning private pain into something structured, visible, and for sale. Surrounded by polished wood and carved marble, you realize that for countless mothers, mourning isn't a personal journey, it's a system. They cannot escape a whole economy built on the terrible possibility that any child's bed might soon lie empty. You step into a draper's shop that feels less like a store and more like solidified storm cloud. Bolts of black fabric tower in stackstole, light-absorbing, heavy. When you touch one, it feels coarse, dense, as if sorrow itself were woven into every thread. The shopkeeper offers a polite, knowing smile, the kind reserved for customers, clearly grieving and clearly about to spend beyond their means. This is the realm of mourning attire. And if you're a Victorian mother, it's not optional. You're expected to wear your loss on your body. The shade, the texture, the chignon speak a language everyone understands. Full mourning demands matte black, especially crepa. Crinkled fabric that looks dignified but feels like dried dishcloth against the skin. Etiquette books prescribe strict timelines, deep black for a year or more, then gradual shifts to half mourning in grays, mauves, or lavenders. Grief has a schedule, stitched right into your wardrobe. You watch a woman stand on a fitting platform as a seamstress winds a tape around her bust, waist, hips, then drags it to the floor for hem length. The customer seems distant, floating just behind her own eyes. She nods automatically to questions about sleeve style or collar shape. The dressmaker, brisk and efficient, murmurs suggestions. Crepe for the gown, bombazine for the skirt, a veil for public outings. Even buttons must be dull, nothing shiny, lest it seem disrespectful. The idea that a gleaming button could offend tells you how seriously this culture treats visual grief. Accessories follow suit. Black gloves, stockings, boots, even handkerchiefs edged in black. In a glass case, a fan printed entirely in grays and blacks catches your eye, designed for hot weather, so a mourner may stay cool without violating sorrow's dress code. The notion of a sad fan is both practical and deeply theatrical, the 19th century equivalent of curated mood playlists. You can almost imagine someone saying, "This is my crying on the omnibus fan. This one's for staring blankly at rain." Jewelry becomes its own mourning dialect. Jet glossy, black fossilized wood is fashioned into necklaces, brooches, earrings. Women wear strands of jet beads close to the throat, each like a polished tear. Some pieces encase locks of the deceased's hair behind glass, transforming grief into wearable remembrance. To modern eyes, it may seem macabre, but for many mothers, keeping a child's hair near set the heart was the closest thing to holding them again. Historians still debate whether hair jewelry offered comfort or simply enforced cultural pressure to display grief correctly. Etiquette manuals lie open on counters, dictating the depth and duration of mourning for each relation. For spouses, rules are rigid. For children, timelines vary, but visible mourning is expected. The message is clear. If you loved someone, your clothes must announce it in black. Fail to comply, and neighbors may label you cold or shallow. In a society obsessed with appearances, mourning attire becomes a moral ledger. Men aren't exempt. They wear black armbands, hatbands, or crepe, but the emotional labor of mourning falls overwhelmingly on women. A mother may replace her entire wardrobe overnight, gowns, coats, even undergarments, dyed or swapped for black. The cost is punishing. Poor women adapt what they have, dyeing dresses, sewing veils from scrap fabric, adding dark ribbons. You can almost hear the weary sigh. Grief comes with laundry instructions. In middle-class homes, the arrival of mourning clothes feels like a second funeral. Packages arrive, paper rustles, and color drains from the household. Curtains may be changed, table linens swapped, calling cards bordered in black. The thicker the border, the fresher the loss. It's the Victorian version of a status update, except delivered via solemn cardboard. These rules shape daily life. A woman in deep mourning avoids parties, dances, even cheerful outings. Step out for bread and pass a music hall. Someone might note you're too lively. The mourning Valaphon harsh crap covers the face in public, trapping moisture, scratching skin. Every walk becomes a small penance, yet there's strange power in it. Mourning clothes grant a shield. Suitors hesitate, gossip softens, obligations pause under the guise of fragility. But they're also a cage. Grief becomes public property. Every street outing declares loss, no anonymity, no escape. Historians still argue whether these customs helped people process sorrow or mainly enforced social control, especially over women already burdened by care and expectation. In a second-hand shop, last year's mourning dresses hang on crowded racks, rows of grief for sale. Some garments show little wear, hinting the death they mourned was recent. Yet here they are ready for another family's tragedy. A thrifty mother might buy one, alter it at home. Sorrow becomes something you can haggle over, hem, and wear. But it reveals how deeply mourning is woven into daily economics. Sometimes rebellion flickers through the seams. A secret colored ribbon sewn inside a cuff visible only to her. A quiet return to lavender before etiquette allows. You might even hear dry humor over tea. The dead surely don't care what crepe we wear, but the neighbors certainly do. The wit is sharp, revealing how exhausting constant performance can be. Near the back of a tailor's workshop, a boy presses black fabric with a heavy iron, sweat on his brow. To him, it's just work. To the mothers who wear it, it's a uniform for endless emotional service. Every pleat, every stitch repeats the same message. I am in mourning. I am not finished with sorrow yet. Stepping back into the street, your eyes adjust to ordinary colors, but in your mind, you still see the black stacks of fabric, the glint of jet, the veils that turn faces into moving shadows. Here, clothing is more than adornment. It's a contract with society. I will stay visibly sad for as long as you demand. For countless Victorian mothers, that contract stretches for years, making every morning in black feel like stepping into grief all over again. You stand before the gates of a palace where curtains hang like closed eyelids. Guards stand rigid. Visitors pass in hushed reverence. Above it all sits a woman whose sorrow has become a national institution. Queen Victoria is not merely a monarch, she is the empire's most famous widow, and her private grief quietly teaches millions how to mourn. Walking through the palace corridors, you pass portraits of earlier queens stiff in silk and jewels. Then you see Victoria and Albert, painted as a devoted couple, not just rulers. 9 children, shared passions, family holidays in Scottish tartan that look oddly like matching pajamas. Their union is romanticized, less political alliance, more storybook love. And that narrative sets the stage. This is a bond worth collapsing over when it ends. Albert dies in 1861. The court reels. You imagine Victoria in a darkened chamber, realizing the man she leaned on for decades is gone. She puts on Blackhand, never takes it off. For the rest of her life, over 40 years, she remains in mourning. It's historical fact. Her wardrobe becomes a permanent billboard for sorrow, like keeping a breakup profile picture forever. The palace bends around her grief. Mirrors are covered, curtains stay drawn, public celebrations are muted. Official portraits show her in black, often with a white widow's cap, gaze distant or downcast. This image spreads across the empire, printed in newspapers, engraved on trinkets, displayed above fireplaces. You can buy keepsakes bearing her mournful face, a strange logo of respectable sadness. Victoria withdraws from public life. Court functions dwindle, balls vanish, ambassadors complain, diplomacy falters, politicians grumble. The public worries about a queen lost in grief. Historians still debate whether her mourning reflected profound love, guilt over past arguments, or a temperament drawn to ritual and intensity. Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. She turns private loss into a decades-long public performance. In drawing rooms across Britain, mothers absorb the lesson. If the queen mourns a husband for 40 years, how long should an ordinary woman grieve a child? Dressmakers and etiquette writers seize the royal example, holding Victoria's black gowns as the gold standard of devotion. The queen is still in black. Dear Shirley, you won't wear lilac yet, becomes a polite reprimand. The royal household becomes a laboratory for mourning protocol. When Victoria loses a child or grandchild, the court shifts instantly. Servants change livery. Rooms are draped. Ceremonies planned. Newspapers report every detail, fabric choices, duration of court mourning as if issuing instructions. Ordinary families read these accounts like manuals, using the palace's choreography to structure their own chaotic grief. Tender yet unsettling details humanize it. Victoria keeps Albert's rooms untouched, his clothes laid out, shaving kit ready, as if he'll return any moment. She places his portraits everywhere, writes of him daily in journals, orders hot water for his morning shave long after death. It borders on ghost story, but becomes an emblem of devotion, repeated in magazines with awe and unease. Her grief spills into public space. Albert's statues rise in cities, memorial halls are built, exhibitions bear his name. The grandest is the gilded monument in Kensington Gardens. You stand at its base, looking up at Albert under a canopy of stone angels. It feels less like commemoration, more like the empire shouting, "We are not over it." This shapes how mothers view loss. Enduring, visible, almost theatrical grief begins to seem noble. If a woman keeps her child's toys untouched, she can point to the queen's preserved rooms and feel less alone. If she hesitates to shed her black dress, she recalls Victoria never did. The queen's mourning becomes a shield. If anyone says, "I should move on," tell them to speak to Her Majesty. yet it also raises expectations. As the empire's maternal symbol, Victoria models quiet suffering, steadfast duty, gentle public demeanor. Rage, numbness, or the desire to escape don't fit that portrait. The Queen's performance makes it harder for ordinary women to admit grief's uglier edges. Critics of her time called her mourning self-indulgent. Admirers saw romantic tragedy that split echoes in parlors and kitchens, women whispering whether someone mourned properly or too long. Victoria's example becomes ammunition on both sides. In a modest terrace house, a mother arranges photos on the mantel. At the center, a print of the Queen in black, beside a faded image of her own lost child. The pairing is deliberate. To her, Victoria isn't just a monarch's proof that lifelong grief can be respectable. As twilight falls over palace and tenement alike, the mother smooths her apron and glances at those serious faces, drawing quiet strength. The Queen's prolonged mourning hangs in the cultural air like smoke-shaping dress, sermons, magazine advice, family expectations. A single widow at the empire's peak has shown that sorrow can stretch across decades, and countless Victorian mothers, already bowed by loss, find themselves in a world where endless mourning isn't just understood, it's quietly encouraged. You enter a Victorian parlor that seems to be holding its breath. Curtains soften the light, a patterned rug muffles footsteps, chairs are pushed back, revealing a strange contraption at the room's center. A wooden tripod, a boxy camera, a black cloth draped over it like a sleeping bat. This isn't for a joyful family portrait. It's for a moment already gone. The photographer moves quietly, brushing dust from the lens with heirloom care. His suit is worn at the elbows. A man who works, not socializes. He checks the window light, muttering, "In this era, light is everything. No flash, no previews, no retakes. Exposure times are long. Everyone must stay perfectly still." Fidgeting is practically sacrilege. On a small sofa, a woman cradles a child dressed in finest clothes, tiny boots, polished, hair combed, cheeks lightly rouged to mimic warmth. But the stillness is too complete. No rise of breath, limbs rest. Too heavily, the mother adjusts the child's collar again, and again her hands circling to delay the moment they must stop. The photographer suggests poses, child alone in a chair or nestled in mother's lap, head on her shoulder. In Victorian Britain, post-mortem photography is common, especially mid to late century. For many families, this image is the first and only photograph they'll ever have of their child. Cameras are luxuries. People don't own albums of smiling snapshots, so death becomes the occasion for photograph's entry into family memory. You watch as the photographer handles the child with porcelain care. Sometimes the pose is peaceful, eyes closed, hands folded. Other times, the goal is lifelike, eyes propped open or pupils later painted onto the print to simulate a living gaze. That detail turns the image into a kind of magic trick, half portrait, half illusion. It may seem eerie today, but for parents, it was a last chance to see their child almost as they were. More tricks assist the illusion. Hidden stands prop up slack bodies so they appear seated. A parent might crouch behind a curtain or chair, holding the child steady while staying out of frame, though sometimes a hand on a shoulder betrays their presence. Flowers are arranged not just for beauty, but to conceal stiffness or discoloration. Historians still debate whether viewers recognized these as post-mortem imagizer, whether families preferred to present them simply as portraits, quietly ignoring the timing. Perhaps it depended on who was looking and how much they needed to believe. The photographer drapes the black cloth over his head, peers through the lens, and calls out instructions in a calm voice, as if this were any ordinary sitting. Chin up a little, hold that pose, do not move. It's an impossible request for a mother whose body trembles with the weight of what she's lost, but she tries. Because this photograph may be all that remains, the mother tries. She bites her lip, fixes her gaze on a spot on the wall, and locks every muscle into place for those endless seconds. If you've ever held a smile too long for a photograph, you know the strain. Now imagine doing it while cradling your dead child, your heart threatening to shatter. Technical details shape the mood. Early daguerreotypes appear on silvered plates with a mirror-like shenso. Fragile, they must be sealed in protective cases. Later, cartivasi prints make it easier and cheaper to share photographs, even post-mortem ones, with distant relatives. You might find a small stack of these tucked in a drawerage, one bearing the face of someone both cherished and gone. The strange intimacy of handling a dead child's likeness in the same format used for statesmen and celebrities creates a quiet collision between public technology and private heartbreak around the room. Props tell silent stories. A favorite toy rests beside the child, a doll, or stuffed animal acting as tiny guardian. A book is placed in a small hand, hinting at lessons never learned. Some families pose living siblings next to the deceased, side by side, as if insisting the bond endures even though one heart has stilled. It's both macabre and deeply tender, like freezing a video call the moment one participant disconnects. Your modern instinct is to flinch and then to gather them all into your arms. Not every family can reach a studio, and not every child dies at a convenient hour for posed photography. So photographers often travel to homes, lugging heavy gear through narrow alleys and muddy lanes. In poorer neighborhoods, settings are cramped and plain. A child laid on a table with a sheet, or on the very bed where they died, flowers scattered to soften the scene. The cost of one photograph may still stretch a family's budget, but parents scrape together coins or go without meals, deciding this image is worth the sacrifice. It's the 19th century equivalent of saying, "Fine, I'll live on soup this month, but I won't miss this chance." Middle-class albums begin to include memorial pages. Families tuck post-mortem photographs into ornate frames, sometimes bordered in black or adorned with woven hair. These portraits sit on mantelpieces, where visitors pause and murmur softly about the likeness. The dead aren't hidden. They greet you from shelves and side tables, their faces fixed in that final, careful arrangement. Life continues around them. Tea is poured, gossip exchanged. Children play at the feet of tables where their departed siblings gaze faintly from behind glass. Emotional responses vary. Some mothers find solace in a tangible image, especially as memories blur with time. Others cannot bear to look, hiding the photograph in a drawer, knowing it's there, but avoiding it like a wound that still stings at the slightest touch. Historians still debate whether post-mortem photography helped families process grief, trapped them in a loop. preserving the rawest moment in permanent stillness. The truth likely shifts from home to home, heart to heart. This practice becomes normalized. Studios advertise memorial portraiture as standard service. Instructional booklets offer posing tips for the recently deceased. Newspapers mention the trend with fascination and inasmuch like modern discussions of digital memorials. But for a Victorian mother, this isn't fashionette survival. Without a photograph, a child risks fading into the blur of memory, especially in families marked by many births and losses. With one, there's at least a solid image to cling to when everything else dissolves at last. The photographer steps back and nods. The hardest part is over. Plates will be developed, prints made perhaps, hand-tinted with soft color on cheeks or blue in the eyes. The mother brushes a stray strand from her child's forehead one final time before the photographer gently lifts the small body away. The room exhales. Chairs are returned, curtains adjusted. Someone puts on the kettlebee, 'cause this is Britain, and tea is the universal response to every emotional extremity. As you leave, your mind lingers on that strange alliance between technology and mourning. A box of lenses and chemicals becomes a vessel of love. The shutter's click captures what life no longer can. For Victorian mothers, post-mortem photography offers a narrow bridge across death's abyssa flat surface of paper where a noisy child remains forever still. It isn't a cure for grief, it's a frame for it. You sit in a hard wooden pew designed, it seems, to punish restlessness. The church smells of aged timber, damp wool, and candle smoke. Hats bob like small boats on a sea of black fabric. Up front, the minister clears his throat for the 50th time. A small white coffin rests near the altar, covered in flowers. The air hums with sniffles and the rustle of handkerchiefs. Every eye keeps drifting back to that flower-draped box. Victorian Britain is steeped in religion. Sundays mean church, Anglican, Methodist, Baptist, Catholic, or one of many dissenting sects. Sermons stretch so long that even the most obedient child counts ceiling beams for distraction. Today's message is simple. The child is with Jesus now. Heaven has gained another angel. For some mothers, this brings real comfort. A tiny soul spared life's hardships, welcomed straight into paradise. The minister paints heaven in cozy detail. Gardens, golden light, celestial music, no pain, no tears. He calls the child a lamb, gathered into the Good Shepherd's arms. You can already picture the memorial cards, a cherubic figure in white, surrounded by lilies. A popular hymn repeats the line, "Safe in the arms of Jesus," a refrain that echoes through funerals, like a soft blanket. But beneath that comfort lies anxiety. Theology about children's souls is complex. Some traditions guarantee heaven to baptized infants. Others leave salvation shrouded in mystery. Mothers listen intently, especially if a baby died before baptism. Historians still debate whether Victorians clung to strict doctrines or gradually embraced gentler visions of the afterlife. The answer likely depends on the pew you occupy and the preacher you hear. Watch one mother in the congregation, her hands not in her lap, as the minister speaks of sin, repentance, and divine judgment. She knows her child never lived long enough to sin beyond fussing at midnight. Yet the undercurrent of fear seeps in. The same faith that promises a shining heaven also warns weekly of hellfire and failure. It's like being handed a fluffy pillow and a stone and told to hold both. Beyond church walls, religious imagery of dead children permeates daily life. Bookshops sell devotional tales of saintly boys and girls who die young after uttering impossibly wise last words despite barely having teeth. These stories stress patience, obedience, pious resignation. The message is clear. A good child faces illness bravely, comforts weeping parents, and slips into heaven like a model pupil dismissed early. If your child's final hours were messy or silent, you might wonder if something went wrong. Memorial cards show tiny angels with curls and wings, perched on clouds or cradled in Jesus' arms. Sometimes they sleep beneath weeping willows. This sentimental art softens loss, wrapping death in lace and pastel light. In some homes, families create framed collages, mixing these images with locks of hair, dried flowers, and scripture, half scrapbook, half shrine, where faith and needlework intertwine. Churchyards echo these themes in stone, carved lambs, broken columns, cherubs. Inscriptions speak of buds transplanted to bloom above, or little ones called home. The language avoids blunt words like dead or buried, preferring gentle metaphors. Grief is translated into stories of journeys and gardens as if the culture cannot bear to say plainly, "This child stopped breathing," so it whispers, "This child went on ahead." Yet not all religious messages soothe. Moralists warn that a child's death may test or judge a mother's faith. Pamphlets urge strict piety, implying that lax discipline or neglected prayer risks eternal consequences. This pressure lands on already broken hearts. A grieving mother may lie awake, wondering if she failed in some invisible spiritual way beyond medicine or hygiene. Spiritualism drifts in like glowing fog. In parlors, women gather for seances, hands clasped around tables, waiting for knocks or messages spelled out letter by letter. Some claim to hear their lost child say, "I'm happy, I watch over you." Others receive vague, fortune cookie wisdom. Historians still debate whether spiritualism offered real solace, harmless entertainment, or exploitation. Likely, it was all three, depending on who sat at the table and who collected the fee. Official religion often condemns these practices. Ministers preach against mediums, warning of deception or darker forces. Yet the church doesn't always fill the specific void these mothers feel. Formal prayers honor the dead, but rarely offer the vivid, conversational contact seances promise. So tension persists. One Sunday, thunderous denunciations from the pulpit. One weekday evening, the same parishioners quietly knocking on a medium's door at home. Bedtime prayers become rituals of self-protection. Children are taught to say, "If I should die before I wake," a line startlingly blunt to modern ears, but practical in a world where death is near. Imagine a child mumbling it quickly to get to story time, while a mother lingers on the words, throat tight, knowing how often that "if" becomes "when." Sunday schools fill with children reciting verses about angels and Jesus' love. Reward cards with bright pictures are handed out, tiny trophies for good memory and behavior. In the back row, a girl whose baby brother died last month stares at an angel illustration, trying to match its face to someone she remembers. These lessons comfort and instruct but also link virtue to obedience, quiet endurance to salvation. Perfect for classroom order, less so for helping a child rage safely about loss. As church bells ring again, summoning the faithful, the sound spills over rooftops, touching every house where a mother folds clothes, stirs a pot, or presses a small shirt that will never be worn. Religion offers her a promise. Her child is safe in heaven. It also imposes expectations, how she should speak, behave, even think about her loss. It gives her a path to comfort and a knot of fear. Tiny angels smile from headstones, but behind them, doctrines whisper in a mix of hope and dread. Victorian mothers learn to live in permanent tension, always half-turned toward heaven, always wondering if love and faith are enough to keep more little souls from slipping away. You stand in a cramped front room that smells of soap, boiled cabbage, and damp laundry. A kettle rattles on the stove. A baby whimpers in a basket. A woman bends over a scrubbed table, kneading bread and stretching dignity a little further. A sharp knock sounds at the door. When she opens it, two visitors step in, coats buttoned, notebooks in hand. They aren't here to comfort, they're here to judge. They might be poor law officials, charity inspectors, or public health officers, part of a growing army convinced Britain's moral health resides in homes like this. To them, every stain, every cough, every unwashed cup hints at deeper failure. Dirt isn't just dirt, it's sin, laziness, ignorance. A mother who buries a child doesn't just grieve, she risks suspicion of having caused it through negligence. You listen as a woman in a stiff bonnet questions the mother. Do you boil the milk? How often do you change bedding? Do you say grace? The questions seem practical, but behind them lurks accusation, especially if a child has recently died. Coroners' inquests often examine infant deaths in poor families, searching for signs of neglect, drunkenness, or worse. Official records show verdicts like overlaying, starvation, or lack of proper care appear regularly, especially among the struggling. Advice manuals fill bookshop shelves, some by doctors, some by clergymen, a few by women turning domestic experience into authority. Titles promise guidance from childbirth to tantrums. But the message repeats like a drumbeat. The home is sacred, and the mother its guardian. If children thrive, she's praised. If they sicken or die, eyes turn to her first. Did she follow the rules? Was the home clean enough, quiet enough, godly enough? Historians still argue whether these books reflected reality or projected impossible ideals. Open one to a passage on infant feeding. Breastfeeding is pure. If impossible, cow's milk must be boiled, bottles sterilized, measurements precise. For a woman with no running water, scant fuel, and crowded quarters, these instructions feel like an exam written for another planet. When things go wrong, blame falls on her, not on poverty. Moralists praise the good mother.com. Pious, ever watchful. She avoids luxuries, gossip, leisure, and certainly doesn't drink or leave children unattended. In working-class neighborhoods, reality clashes constantly with this ideal. A woman who must work may leave children with older siblings or no one. If harm occurs, blame travels straight to her. Newspaper reports on tragic deaths follow a pattern. List the children, the cramped rooms, the father's job then land on the mother's choices. Did she leave a candle burning? Was she seen drinking? Was the house slovenly? At inquests, neighbors testify with pity and criticism. One obsessive detail: whether the front step was scrubbed on wash day. Baby farming scandals heighten suspicion. Women take in infants for fees, sometimes caring, sometimes neglecting. When deaths occur, the press erupts with tales of cruelty. Unmarried or destitute mothers who give up children are painted as heartless, those who accept them as monsters. The conversation becomes a morality play about failed womanhood, not economic desperation. Even in wealthy homes, mothers face judgment. Doctors chide fashionable women for delegating too much to nannies. Yet these same women are expected to host, manage households, and maintain social standing, a no-win trap. Devote yourself entirely to children. Neglect society. Step back. Neglect the nursery. Science joins the chorus. Public health campaigns rightly promote clean water and ventilation, but their reports often link high mortality to dirty districts and immoral habits, implying the poor are defective, not the conditions. A mother from such an area becomes both victim and culprits, someone to rescue and scold. Simultaneously, picture a health visitor in a tidy hat entering a tiny kitchen. She checks the baby's weight, lectures on boiling water and airing bedding. Her advice can save lives, but her tone suggests any failure is the mother's alone. The landlord who won't fix damp walls, the employer paying starvation wages, the city delaying sanitation, all vanish from view. Only the woman with the baby remains in the spotlight. In courtrooms, judges sentence women accused of infanticide or neglect. Some cases involve clear harm. Others, exhausted mothers falling asleep beside infants, or families stretching food too thin. Juries sometimes show mercy but often echo social fears, declaring certain women unfit as if they've offended nature itself. Motherhood becomes less a biological state and more a moral exam. Not everyone passes. Stories ripple through neighborhoods. This child died because the mother drank. That one because the house was dirty. Another because she ignored the doctor. Truth, exaggeration, or fiction, the lesson is the same. If anything goes wrong, the finger points at the woman in the apron. It's social control disguised as concern-free, endless blame service. Back in that cramped room, the inspectors finally leave. The mother sags against the table, eyes on a small garment folded on a chair, the one her child will never wear. She carries not just grief, but everyone else's judgment of it. In a world that treats the home as morality's center and mothers as its gatekeepers, grief is rarely just grief. It's a verdict waiting to be pronounced, with a woman's character on trial every time. A small grave is dug. You stand outside a massive gray brick building, squatting at town's edge like a sulking giant. Bars cross the windows. A high wall encircles the yard. Over the gate, a sign reads, "Union Workhouse." It looks part prison, part school, part factory. Officially, it's a safety net for the destitute. Unofficially, it's a warning. Don't fall too far. A woman approaches, skirts damp, a child on each side, a baby wrapped in a shawl against her chest. She hesitates. Behind her, no husband, no rent paid, no food left. The 1834 Poor Law promises relief, but relief means this address: she knocks. The heavy door opens onto a world that will slice her life into bureaucratic pieces inside. The first encounter isn't kindness, it's paperwork. A clerk with crisp hair and love of forms asks her age, marital status, last residence, religion, health. He scribbles it all, as if a human life fits neatly into boxes. You can almost hear the hum of bureaucracy. Victorian talent for turning misery into tidy columns. Then comes the real shock. Her family will be separated. Workhouses enforce strict segregation, men in one ward, women in another, children often elsewhere. The goal: prevent immorality. The effect: ripping families apart when they need each other most. Older children are led away. She and the baby go to the nursery ward. Historians debate how rigidly rules were enforced, but for many mothers, the memory of a child's hand pulled from theirs at the gate remains a lifelong wound. Daily life is relentless. Early wake, roll call, meager breakfast, then labor picking oakum, scrubbing floors, breaking stones. Food is deliberately bland. Bread, gruel, thin soup. Reformers designed it so workhouse life is worse than the lowest paid job, discouraging abuse of charity. It's a safety net lined with barbed wire for mothers. The cruelest part is limited contact with their children, brief, supervised visits in crowded rooms. Babies in the nursery are tended by overworked staff. Illness spreads fast. A cough here, a fever there, and soon several cradles hold silent, still forms. If a child dies, the news comes briskly. There are procedures. Emotion is extra in the infirmary or lying in ward. Women give birth in conditions ranging from tolerable to horrific. Medical care varies. Records do not. Births and deaths are logged with precise dates and causes. A baby who never sees daylight may exist in history only as two lines in a ledger ink that captures no tears. Burial options are minimal. No undertaker, no choices. The institution orders cheap bulk coffins. The body is washed, wrapped, placed in a plain box. Sometimes several are carted together to a municipal cemetery or workhouse burial ground. Graves may lack markers. Names fade from wooden tags. Eventually, no one can point to a patch of grass and say, "My child lies here." In some places, a grim practicality emerges. Reusable coffins. The outer box appears solid, but the bottom hinges open. Used for the service, then lifted over the grave, the body drops in. The coffin is saved for next time. The system saves money. The emotional cost ignored. For a mother imagining her child tipped out like laundry, the thought is brutal. To avoid such humiliation, many join burial clubs, early insurance schemes. For a few pence a week, they guarantee a respectable funeral. Posters in lodging houses and pubs advertise them. Parents may skip meals, so the collector's tin still clinks. It's a grim savings plan, paying in advance to ensure at least one part of life looks dignified, but shadows linger. Occasionally, scandals erupt. A child with multiple policies dies suspiciously. Newspapers seize on tales of heartless parents valuing coins over children. While some cases involve real cruelty, most are families desperate to avoid workhouse graves. The nuance rarely makes headlines in this world. Even death is stratified by class, by coin, by the quiet, crushing weight of a system that judges mothers before it helps them. And through it all, they carry not only their loss, but the unbearable burden of proving, again and again, that they deserved to love at all. Headlines favor the sensational over the slow, grinding reality of poverty. In crowded city districts, poor mothers walk to cemeteries with modest processions, perhaps a plain cart, a few neighbors, a hymn sung slightly off-key. Another kind of loss occurs when children are removed from impoverished families for their own good. Boards of guardians place them in apprenticeships, industrial schools, or with foster families in distant parishes. Some placements offer real opportunity. Others resemble cheap labor arrangements. A mother who signs a form she barely understands may discover too late that she has little power to reclaim her child once officials deemed the new home better. Here, grief isn't marked by a grave but by an empty bed and letters that may never be answered inside the workhouse. Life marches on regardless. Bells ring, meals are served, routines enforced. New paupers arrive as others depart in coffins, or, more rarely, on their own feet. The women's ward hums with a mix of chatter and silence, needles stitching fabric, hands raw from scrubbing. A mother folding institutional linen might glance through a high window toward the road, imagining a small figure walking away, free. The rules say she's being helped. Her heart keeps a different ledger. Years later, you picture her standing by the perimeter of a cemetery, clutching flowers with no certain place to lay them. Somewhere beneath the grass lie children, relatives, neighbors, all drawn into the orbit of workhouses and anonymous graves. There are no angels, no elaborate headstones, no personalized verses. The ground is nearly nameless. For someone who lived under the constant shadow of the workhouse, mourning never truly ends. It stretches across hunger, forced separation, and the bitter knowledge that even in death, poverty followed her family to the very last inch of earth. You're in a small sitting room, bathed in late afternoon light, the kind that turns dust motes golden and makes unpaid bills seem slightly less daunting. A clock ticks on the mantel. A pot simmers in the kitchen. On the table before you, a folded black dress, a stack of condolence letters, a sewing basket. The house tries to feel normal, but everything leans quietly toward you, as if holding its breath. In Victorian Britain, the home is endlessly praised as a sanctuary. Magazines, sermons, and advice books depict it as a peaceful kingdom. The husband, the noble breadwinner. The wife, the angel of the house. That phrase isn't mere poetry, becomes a cultural ideal, casting the woman as the emotional anchor who keeps everyone calm, kind, and spiritually grounded. Reality adds a cruel twist. If grief threatens to shatter the family, the angel is expected to reassemble it while ensuring dinner doesn't burn. You watch a mother sit at the table, opening another condolence letter. The paper is edged in black, a silent announcement of its contents before a word is read. The handwriting loops gracefully, offering sympathy, recalling a sweet memory of the child, perhaps adding a line about God's inscrutable will. But with every letter comes an unspoken demand. A reply is expected. Not writing back risks seeming cold or ungrateful. So she dips her pen and begins. Thank you for your kind words. We are bearing up as best we can. The phrases repeat until they feel like laundry patterns worn smooth by repetition. Letter writing turns grief into homework. Friends, cousins, church acquaintances send notes. She writes back again and again, tailoring each just enough to feel personal. If her husband signs any, it's usually after she's drafted them. Though condolences are addressed to the whole family, she alone absorbs their emotional weight and crafts the socially acceptable response. You can imagine her hand cramping as she searches for new ways to say, "Thank you for noticing my heart has been ripped open inside the house." Everyone feels pain, but not everyone is permitted to show it. A father may retreat into silence, burying himself in work or the newspaper. Sons are told not to cry, "Be brave, be strong, for your mother's sake." Daughters are praised for gentle tears and helpfulness. In this swirl, the mother is expected to maintain equilibrium. She soothes her husband's guilt, comforts siblings haunted by nightmares, updates relatives, and still manages meals and laundry. Historians still debate whether these expectations gave some women a sense of purpose that helped them endure grief, simply crushed them under duties that left no room to collapse. You follow her into the kitchen. The baby is gone, but routines persist. Kettles boil. Bread must rise. The dog still expects scraps at tea time. Ordinary tasks become minefields. A favorite cup on the shelf. A high chair no longer needing wiping. A tiny spoon tucked in a drawer. Each object ambushes her with memory. Yet she keeps moving because the era's ideology insists a well-run home is both her duty and her therapy. Keep busy, people tell her, as if grief were a stain scrubbed away by labor. Friends and neighbors visit, sometimes with sorrows, sometimes with unsolicited advice. They lower their voices when mentioning the child, then lift them to normal pitch for gossip or weather. The mother matches their tone, laughing softly at a joke to put guests at ease, though inside she feels anything but amusement. Social etiquette rewards women who perform this balancing act, staying composed, refilling teacups, keeping tears mostly hidden. This earns her praise for strength. That it leaves her exhausted barely registers. In middle and upper class homes, daughters watch and learn. They see their mothers host gatherings in rooms where portraits of dead siblings hang. They notice when mother disappears briefly, returns with slightly reddened eyes, and resumes smiling. It's an informal education in emotional management. In some households, you might spot a special drawer or box, tended like a secret garden canning, a lock of hair, a last note, a small toy. She arranges and rearranges these relics, preserving the past while carving out a private space to feel. Domestic servants, if the family can afford them, become part of this emotional machinery. A maid may take on extra chores or soften her speech to mirror the mistress's mood. Yet the expectation remains. The woman of the house holds the emotional reins. She decides whether mourning is loud or quiet, formal or subdued, even in sorrow. She directs the script. In working-class homes without servants, pressure doesn't vanish, condenses. A woman who's just buried a child may still take in laundry, scrub floors, or sell vegetables at market the next day. Customers might cheerfully ask, "Feeling better now?" as if grief were a cold to shake off. At night, when the house finally quiets, she may sit alone by a dying fire, mending clothes by candlelight. The day's labor delayed her tears, but didn't erase them. Sometimes grief spills in ways that defy the angelic ideal. She might snap at a surviving child, shout at a careless relative, or sink into such despair she can't rise from bed. Those around her interpret this through moral judgment. Too much weeping means she's hysterical. Too little, that she's heartless. Just enough, that she's admirable. The measuring sticks are invisible, but ever present. Over teacups, whispers circulate. She bears it beautifully, or she really ought to pull herself together by now. Community rituals weave into this emotional labor. Anniversaries, birthdays, religious holidays are marked by an extra empty space in church. The mother often remembers the dates, quietly arranging flowers or visiting graves. Others may join, but she is the calendar and the conscience. If no one speaks of the day, she still feels it in her bones, like a shift in the weather. She must choose, keep the awareness to herself, or gently remind the family, risking a fresh wave of pain. In private diaries, sometimes capture what the parlor cannot. A woman may pour out anger at God, resentment toward a distant husband, or aching longing to flee a house that's become a museum of lost futures. These pages rarely leave her drawer, in her lifetime a secret ledger of the cost of performing calm. When discovered later, they shock readers who thought she'd always been composed. The gap between surface and depth proves wide enough to swallow entire days. Picture one evening, the house is deeply quiet. Older children sleep. Her husband snores gently in a chair. The lamp is low. She sits with her sewing basket, needle moving by habit more than intent. For a moment, her face drops all expression, no brave smile, no gentle encouragement, no polite attentiveness, just sheer, unadorned exhaustion. The clock ticks. The fire settles. Her shoulders slump. In that pause, it's painfully clear. Her grief isn't a single episode. It's a job without days off, a role she never applied for. With duties that never truly end, you sit in a quiet consulting room that tries too hard to be calming and ends up feeling like a waiting room for ghosts. Pale wallpaper, neat curtains, and an ivy plant in the corner that forgot to be tasteful and started thriving. Papers are stacked in perfect piles. A doctor adjusts his spectacles, folds his hands, and studies you with the focus of someone selecting a diagnosis from a menu. You're not here for fever or rash. You're here because you can't stop crying at odd moments, or can't cry at all. Because your hands shake pouring tea. Because sleep has become an enemy, either refusing you or crashing over you in sudden, unwanted naps. Because every sound is too loud, and every silence worse. The word hovering on his lips is one you've heard whispered about others: hysteria. In 19th century medicine, hysteria becomes a catch-all label for women's unexplained symptoms: fainting, irritability, insomnia, paralysis, odd pains, emotional outbursts, rooted in ancient ideas linking the uterus to the mind. The theory is shaky but persistent, like a guest who won't leave the party. Historians still debate whether these women suffered genuine neurological conditions or whether hysteria was mostly a way to pathologize understandable reactions to grief. The doctor asks about appetite, menstrual cycles, sleep, thoughts. He doesn't ask about poverty, overcrowding, or the weight of endless mourning. Those belong to life, not medicine. Instead, he writes terms like nervous exhaustion, neurasthenia, or melancholia fashionable late Victorian labels, especially among the middle and upper classes. Nervous breakdowns even become a kind of status symbol, proof of sensitivity and refinement. Of course, they feel far less elegant when you're the one shaking at 3 a.m. Treatment options are a mix of mercy and misery. One popular approach is the rest cure, prescribed by influential physicians. Complete bed rest for weeks or months. No visitors, no reading, no writing, no decisions. Heavy meals, rich foods, massages, and absolute mental inactivity. The theory, overworked nerves heal in silence. The reality, boredom and isolation often deepen despair. A curious detail: patients are urged to drink copious mecas if dairy alone could mend a shattered psyche. Women who can't afford private care may end up in asylums ranging from humane to horrifying. High walls, locked doors, echoing corridors. Patients are labeled melancholic, hysterical, or imbecile. A mother who's lost several children and begun speaking to empty cradles may simply be filed under insane, her grief flattened into a diagnosis that ignores its cause. Records show many female admissions stem from childbirth, pregnancy, or bereavement. Treatments can be brutal: cold baths, restraints, isolation. Yet pockets of genuine care exist. Some doctors introduce gardening, sewing, painting, early forms of occupational therapy. Others pioneer talking sessions, foreshadowing psychotherapy. Historians still argue whether these institutions were cruel warehouses or flawed attempts at healing within the limits of their time. The answer depends on the place and the people running it. In respectable parlors, nervous troubles are discussed in hushed, almost glamorous tones. A lady is said to have delicate nerves, needing quiet and gentleness. Her husband tells guests she's resting upstairs. This frames suffering as a mark of refinement available only to those with leisure and means. A factory worker crumbling under grief and exhaustion is less likely to be called neurasthenic, more likely unstable or difficult. You picture a mother in a doctor's office, repeating, "I'm so tired," not just physically, but in her bones, her thoughts, her will. The doctor nods, prescribes tonics, seaside holidays, temporary relief from duties. But unless there's substantial help, the rest remains theoretically. Prescribing a vacation to someone who can't afford shoes. Later in the century, new ideas emerge. Theories of the unconscious suggest symptoms like paralysis may express buried emotional conflict. The notion that trauma shapes the body and mind is radical, but most Victorian mothers won't lie on couches unpacking dreams. These conversations happen in lecture halls, not kitchens. Informal counseling exists. Clergy, elder women, friends offer advice shaped by faith or experience. Pray more. Work harder. Accept God's will. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it deepens shame. Many women quietly blame themselves. If only I were stronger, holier, I wouldn't feel this way. The line between sin and sickness blurs. Household remedies offer small comforts: lavender sachets, chamomile tea, long walks, seaside air. Coastal towns advertise invigorating breezes. Salt air may soothe, but it can't erase years of loss. A week by the waves won't heal funerals. A quieter outlet appears in creative work. Some women write poetry, keep journals, embroider, sketch, or compose music. These are praised as feminine pursuits, but they also become covert channels for unspoken pain. A lullaby may carry deeper sorrow than its tune suggests. An embroidery may hide symbols only its maker understands. Historians debate whether this offered true emotional agency or remained constrained by convention. Imagine finding a thin journal in faded ink. At first, entries are practical: bread, coal, doctor's fee. Then, could not stop crying, dreamt of the baby again. Fear I'm losing my mind. The handwriting trembles, steadies, trembles again. No doctor reads this. No label is attached. Yet it's as real a record of suffering as any medical file. The difference being, she defines her own experience, not someone else. The doctor leans back and delivers his verdict. Your nerves are overtaxed. You need rest, moderation, perhaps a change of scene. He may offer medications, bromides, or chloral that dull the edges of consciousness. You take the prescription, half relieved to have a name for your pain, half uneasy at what that name implies. Hysterical, nervous, melancholic, each word, both explanation and accusation. You step back into the street. Children shout, carts rattle, bells toll. The world hasn't changed, only the label on your pain. Then, one day, you notice something lighter in the air. The city is still smoky, the cobbles still wet, but the sea of unbroken black has fractured. Here, a woman in soft gray, there, one in lilac, another in navy. Mourning hasn't vanished, but it no longer drapes the world like a shroud. You follow a woman into a fashionable department store. Once, she'd have faced a draper's shop stocked only in black. Now, she passes glittering cases of silk, lace, bright parasols before reaching the sober section. And even there, black crepe shares space with deep blues and purples. Fabrics look less like punishment, more like choice. Women's magazines show new silhouettes, narrower skirts, softer bodices, simpler trims. Elaborate mourning gowns begin to seem fussy beside sleeker styles. Fashion subtly eases tradition's grip. A woman eager to return to color can now cite the latest illustration. I'm simply keeping up. Historians debate whether fashion led this shift or merely met a private desire for relief. Meanwhile, medicine advances. Clean water, sewage systems, germ theory, vaccination all slowly reduce infant mortality. Fewer tiny graves appear in cemeteries. As death visits less often, the culture of perpetual heavy mourning loosens. In newer sections of burial grounds, children's headstones grow simpler, just names and dates, less crowded with poetry. Cremation societies form. The first crematoria open, part industrial, part solemn experiment. Attitudes toward the body after death begin to shift. Shop windows reflect the change. Undertakers still display coffins but now advertise efficiency and discretion. Funeral directors present themselves as logistics managers, not ritual gatekeepers. Packages range from full ceremony to quiet simplicity. Even stationery evolves. Black-edged paper remains, but now comes with narrow borders or soft gray tones, as if mourning itself can be dialed like a dial dot in parlors. Families frame photos of lost children alongside wedding pictures, holiday snapshots, school achievements. The dead no longer dominate the walls. Albums blend memorial images with everyday life. Hair lockets and pressed funeral flowers share space with theater tickets and postcards. Grief is still present, but it no longer fills every shelf. Sermons still mention heaven, but increasingly emphasize comfort over fear, love over judgment. Ministers acknowledge sorrow's rawness instead of rushing to consolation. Liberal theology and scientific thought nudge beliefs toward flexibility. Easing the guilt some mothers once carried, psychology seeps into ordinary talk. Newspapers discuss nerves and stress as normal responses, not moral failings. The idea that talking helps spreads beyond clinics. A woman might confide in a doctor or minister and be told to express, not suppress her feelings. It's not modern therapy, but it's a step away from the demand for perfect composure. Household guides shift to mourning periods shorten. Advice appears on adapting existing dresses instead of buying full black wardrobes. Some writers openly argue against excessive post-death spending. Mourning becomes less a moral duty enforced by neighbors and more a personal choice shaped by budget, taste, and tolerance for discomfort. You can almost hear a collective sigh of relief from tired shoulders and sore feet in literature and popular culture. Excessive mourning is gently mocked. Novels feature characters who refuse to move on, portrayed as slightly absurd. Humor magazines publish cartoons of women dripping in black while clearly enjoying parties. The joke isn't grief itself, but society's theatrical indulgence of it. The permanently veiled widow loses romantic allure and gains a hint of ridiculousness. Generational tension flares in families. Elders insist on long, black, strict anniversaries. Younger women eye their bright dresses and new opportunities, reluctant to vanish into crepe for months. Many compromise, observing deep mourning briefly, then shifting faster to half mourning than etiquette once allowed. These quiet negotiations, played out over sewing tables and tea, reshape social norms more effectively than any law. Economic change accelerates the shift. More women enter paid work in offices, shops, factories. Employers don't accommodate months of absence or heavy veils. A clerk can't wear mourning crepe while managing ledgers. A shopgirl can't disappear for every family death. Practicality demands simpler signals: a black armband, a dark dress, a discreet brooch, and then larger tragedies loom: colonial wars, then the vast slaughters of the 20th century. Societies confront loss on a scale that makes individual, elaborate mourning impossible. Public memorials, monuments, and national rituals emerge to share the burden. Collective remembrance grows as private displays shrink. Historians still debate whether this truly lightens grief, simply drives it into quieter, less visible corners. You walk once more down a late Victorian, early Edwardian high street. Funeral notices still hang in windows. Undertakers still ply their trade, but the air feels different. The rigid architecture of sorrow has begun to soften. Not because grief has vanished, but because people have started to imagine it might not have to consume every room, every garment, every breath. The weight hasn't disappeared, but for the first time, it feels like it might be shared. Processions still wind through streets. Black-edged notices still appear in shop windows. Widows still uphold faithful rituals for decades. Yet, around them, the texture of everyday life has shifted. Dresses now flutter in lighter fabrics. Chemists stock modern pain relievers. Newspapers debate science and social reform. Mourning hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer a permanent uniform. It's become more like a temporary costume. For many mothers, that means the possibility of stepping back into the world, wearing something other than black, carrying their losses inwardly. Rather than stitched into every inch of their clothing, you stand in a hospital corridor that smells of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. Automatic doors slide open and shut with soft sighs. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeps in a slow, steady rhythm. You pass posters on hand washing and breastfeeding, a cart stacked with tiny diapers, and step into a room where a woman lies on a raised bed, one hand resting protectively over a belly that no longer holds a child. Outside the window, cars glide by, buses pause at stops, people scroll through phones. But inside this room, time feels suspended as if it missed the memo that life is supposed to go on. Medicine has transformed the odds in ways that would seem like magic to Victorian eyes. Clean water, antibiotics, antiseptic surgery, vaccines, neonatal incubators, these have reshaped the landscape of childhood survival. In many wealthier nations today, a child is far more likely to reach adulthood than ever before. And yet, miscarriages, stillbirths, sudden infant deaths, and harrowing labors haven't vanished. They've simply grown quieter, less visible. Historians still debate whether modern societies are genuinely less haunted by child death, or whether the reduced frequency merely conceals its emotional weight more effectively. You can feel that question lingering above every empty crib. A nurse enters with practiced gentleness. Her uniform is in soft pastels. Her shoes squeak faintly on the linoleum. She offers the mother a memory box. Inside may be a tiny hospital hat, a wristband, an inked footprint on a palm-sized card. Some hospitals also provide photographs taken in those first and last hours. The camera is digital now, with instant previews and filters. But the impulse is familiar. One image, something tangible to hold when everything else slips away. You glance at the print and see a face that barely had time to form an expression. Later, at home, the mother stands in a nursery, fully outfitted for a baby who never slept there. A mobile spins slowly above the empty cot. She runs her hand over folded onesies and soft blankets. Her grief is sharp, but tangled within it are unspoken expectations. Friends and relatives offer well-meaning phrases. At least you know you can get pregnant. Your young you can try again. The words land like pebbles dropped into a deep well. The message is clear. Feel this, yes, but not for too long. Don't let it consume your whole life. On her phone, sympathy arrives in small, glowing rectangles, text messages, heart emojis, comments, beneath a brief social media post about loss. Some people share their own stories, reaching across screens to say, "You're not alone." Others offer familiar religious reassurances. "Your baby is an angel now. Heaven needed another star." These lines are meant to comfort. That narrative has endured. swapping printed memorial cards for digital profile pictures and angel-themed backgrounds. You scroll through social media beside her and see how mourning has found a new stage. Feeds overflow with pregnancy announcements, gender reveals, baby showers, and newborn smiles. Tucked between them, stark, quiet posts announcing loss. Some mothers share photos of their stillborn babies wrapped in blankets, held close. Others post only a candle, a quote, or a date. Grief now lives in the same stream as funny cat videos and dinner recipes. Then, slipping away as the feed scrolls on, a curious modern touch, downloadable graphics with phrases like angel mama or bereaved mother in delicate script digital badges of sorrow added to online profiles. You attend a support group in a quiet community center. Chairs are arranged in a loose circle, no black crepe, no veils, no rigid etiquette, just jeans, sweaters, work shirts, styrofoam cups of tea. Mothers and sometimes fathers speak openly about babies who lived minutes, hours, or not at all. No one suggests grief should end by a certain month. They talk about anxiety in subsequent pregnancies, flinching in baby aisles, waking to phantom cries in the night. The language is casual, not formal, but the emotions would be instantly recognizable to a Victorian mother. Today, doctors name these experiences postpartum depression, complicated grief, birth, trauma, anxiety disorder. Therapists offer cognitive tools, medication, safe spaces to speak. There are worksheets and coping strategies, not enforced bed rest and gallons of milk. Some women find genuine healing in these resources, slowly rebuilding their days. Others discover that even the best therapy can't fully reach the part of them still living in that hospital room. The modern vocabulary has largely moved blame away from sin or moral weakness. Yet a whisper of self-criticism often remains. I should be coping better. I should be grateful for what I still have. In baby stores, another echo surfaces. Among the rattles and booties, special displays offer keepsakes for parents of angel babies, necklaces with tiny footprints, rings engraved with names and dates, charms shaped like wings. Some designs are sleek and minimal, others deliberately vintage, almost Victorian in their flourishes. The impulse to carry a physical token of the lost child, once hair in a locket, now ashes in a pendant. It simply changed metals and marketing. Cemeteries to blend old and new. In children's sections, you'll find not just stone angels, but bright plastic windmills, faded stuffed animals, solar-powered lights that flicker after dusk. Grandparents bring trimmed bouquets. Parents sit on the grass, sometimes speaking aloud, sometimes in silence. Headstones bear nicknames, cartoon characters, carved toys. The idea that a dead child remains forever young endures. But the symbols have shifted from lambs and lilies to teddy bears and superheroes. Some mothers choose not to mark their loss publicly at all. They return to work quickly, keep conversations light, deflect questions with practiced ease. In private, they may still keep a box in a closet, circle the same date on every year's planner, tuck an ultrasound photo in a drawer's back corner. Modern culture brims with advice about resilience, positivity, and self-care. It can be hard to admit that some wounds never fully close. The pressure to move on and stay strong feels like a gentler cousin to older expectations that women must manage a household's emotional climate, no matter their own pain. Historians, psychologists, and parents continue debating how deeply Victorian ideals still shape today's experiences of motherhood and mourning. Some argue the 19th century cemented the image of mothers as emotional guardians deeply bonded to their children and morally responsible for their well-being. Others believe each generation rewrites grief using the tools and platforms it has, adapting loss to its own time, standing between the hospital corridor and the old cemetery in your mind. You sense that both views hold truth. You take one last look at the modern mother in her quiet room. No black veil, no etiquette manuals on the nightstand, no undertaker waiting in the hall. Instead, a box of tissues, a buzzing phone, a leaflet from a support charity, perhaps a half-empty prescription bottle on the dresser. She's still expected to keep life running, still judged, however subtly, for how she handles sorrow, still haunted by what-ifs, yet she also has more language, more choices, more potential allies than many women in earlier centuries. Her mourning can be private or public, creative or quiet, stretched out or neatly folded away. The old shadows haven't vanished, but she has more paths through them now. You lean back and let the images soften at the edges. The soot-choked chimneys, the fluorescent hospital halls, the dim Victorian parlors, the glowing screens all blur into a distant collage, like city lights seen from far away at night. You don't need to hold every detail in focus. You can let them drift as if they were leaves floating on slow-moving water. Notice your own breath, that steady, unassuming rhythm that has carried you through this entire journey. In through the nose, out through the mouth, or however feels easiest. No one is asking you to be strong, insightful, or historically precise. Right now, you're allowed simply to exist, to listen, to float, to be. The hard truths you've heard about loss and love can rest to one side for a while, like books gently closed on a table. They'll be there if you ever wish to open them again. If any part of this story brushed against your own life, let yourself feel whatever rises: sadness, curiosity, or just a quiet empathy for those who carried heavy burdens in cramped rooms and echoing wards. Then let that feeling soften the way bright colors fade in evening light. Remind yours. The hard truths you've heard about loss and love can rest to one side for a while, like books gently closed on a table. They'll be there if you ever wish to open them again. If any part of this story brushed against your own life, let yourself feel whatever rise: sadness, curiosity, or just a quiet empathy for those who carried heavy burdens in cramped rooms and echoing wards. Then let that feeling soften the way bright colors fade in evening light in respectable parlors. Nervous troubles are discussed in hushed, almost glamorous tones. A lady is said to have delicate nerves, needing quiet and gentleness. Her husband tells guests she's resting upstairs. This frames suffering as a mark of refinement available only to those with leisure and means. A factory worker crumbling under grief and exhaustion is less likely to be called neurasthenic, more likely unstable or difficult. You picture a mother in a doctor's office, repeating, "I'm so tired," not just physically, but in her bones, her thoughts, her will. The doctor nods, prescribes tonics, seaside holidays, temporary relief from duties. But unless there's substantial help, The rest remains theoretically, prescribing a vacation to someone who can't afford shoes. Later in the century, new ideas emerge. Theories of the unconscious suggest symptoms like paralysis may express buried emotional conflict. The notion that trauma shapes the body and mind is radical, but most Victorian mothers won't lie on couches unpacking dreams. These conversations happen in lecture halls, not kitchens. Informal counseling exists. Clergy, elder women, friends offer advice shaped by faith or experience. Pray more. Work harder. Accept God's will. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it deepens shame. Many women quietly blame themselves. If only I were stronger, holier, I wouldn't feel this way. The line between sin and sickness blurs. Household remedies offer small comforts: lavender sachets, chamomile tea, long walks, seaside air. Coastal towns advertise invigorating breezes as salt air may soothe, but it can't erase years of loss. A week by the waves won't heal funerals. A quieter outlet appears in creative work. Some women write poetry, keep journals, embroider, sketch, or compose music. These are praised as feminine pursuits, but they also become covert channels for unspoken pain. A lullaby may carry deeper sorrow than its tune suggests. An embroidery may hide symbols only its maker understands. Historians debate whether this offered true emotional agency or remained constrained by screen. Imagine finding a thin journal in faded ink. At first, entries are practical: bread, coal, doctor's fee. Then, could not stop crying. Dreamt of the baby again. Fear, I'm losing my mind. The handwriting trembles, steadies, trembles again. No doctor reads this. No label is attached. Yet, it's as real a record of suffering as any medical file. The difference being, she defines her own experience, not someone else. Back in the consulting room, the doctor leans back and delivers his verdict. Your nerves are overtaxed. You need rest, moderation, perhaps a change of scene. He may offer medications, bromides, or chloral that dull the edges of consciousness. You take the prescription, half relieved to have a name for your pain, half uneasy at what that name implies: hysterical, nervous, melancholic. Each word, both explanation and accusation. You step back into the street. Children shout, carts rattle, bells toll. The world hasn't changed, only the label on your pain. Then, one day, you notice something lighter in the air. The city is still smoky, the cobbles still wet, but the sea of unbroken black has fractured. Here, a woman in soft gray. There, one in lilac. Another in navy. Mourning hasn't vanished, but it no longer drapes the world like a shroud. You follow a woman into a fashionable department store. Once, she'd have faced a draper's shop, stocked only in black. Now, she passes glittering cases of silk, lace, bright parasols before reaching the sober section, and even there, black crepe shares space with deep blues and purples. Fabrics look less like punishment, more like choice. Women's magazines show new silhouettes, narrower skirts, softer bodices, simpler trims. Elaborate morning gowns begin to seem fussy beside sleeker styles. Fashion subtly eases tradition's grip. A woman eager to return to color can now cite the latest illustration. I'm simply keeping up. Historians debate whether fashion led this shift or merely met a private desire for relief. Meanwhile, medicine advances. Clean water, sewage systems, germ theory, vaccination all slowly reduce infant mortality. Fewer tiny graves appear in cemeteries. As death visits less often, the culture of perpetual heavy mourning loosens. In newer sections of burial grounds, children's headstones grow simpler, just names and dates, less crowded with poetry. Cremation societies form. The first crematoria open part industrial. Attitudes toward the body after death begin to shift. Shop windows reflect the change. Undertakers still display coffins but now advertise efficiency and discretion. Funeral directors present themselves as logistics managers, not ritual gatekeepers. Packages range from full ceremony to quiet simplicity. Even stationery evolves. Black-edged paper remains, but now comes with narrow borders or soft gray tones, as if mourning itself can be dialed like a dialed dot in parlors. Families frame photos of lost children alongside wedding pictures, holiday snapshots, school achievements. The dead no longer dominate the walls. Albums blend memorial images with everyday life. Hair lockets and pressed funeral flowers share space with theater tickets and postcards. Grief is still present, but it no longer fills every shelf. Religious language softens. Sermons still mention heaven but increasingly emphasize comfort over fear, love over judgment. Ministers acknowledge sorrow's rawness instead of rushing to consolation. Liberal theology and scientific thought nudge beliefs toward flexibility. Easing the guilt some mothers once carried, psychology seeps into ordinary talk. Newspapers discuss nerves and stress as normal responses, not moral failings. The idea that talking helps spreads beyond clinics. A woman might confide in a doctor or minister and be told to express not. It's not modern therapy, but it's a step away from the demand for perfect composure. Household guides shift to mourning periods shorten. Advice appears on adapting existing dresses instead of buying full black wardrobes. Some writers openly argue against excessive post-death spending. Mourning becomes less a moral duty enforced by neighbors and more a personal choice shaped by budget, taste, and tolerance for discomfort. You can almost hear a collective sigh of relief from tired shoulders and sore feet in literature and popular culture. Excessive mourning is gently mocked. Novels feature characters who refuse to move on, portrayed as slightly absurd. Humor magazines publish cartoons of women dripping in black while clearly enjoying parties. The joke isn't grief itself, but society's theatrical indulgence of it. The permanently veiled widow loses romantic allure and gains a hint of ridiculousness. Generational tension flares in families. Elders insist on long, black, strict anniversaries. Younger women eye their bright dresses and new opportunities, reluctant to vanish into crepe for months. Many compromise, observing deep mourning briefly, then shifting faster to half mourning than etiquette once allowed. These quiet negotiations, played out over sewing tables and tea, reshape social norms more effectively than any law. Economic change accelerates the shift. More women enter paid work in offices, shops, factories. Employers don't accommodate months of absence or heavy veils. A clerk can't wear morning crepe while managing ledgers. A shopgirl can't disappear for every family death. Practicality demands simpler signals. A black armband, a dark dress, a discreet brooch, and then larger tragedies loom: colonial wars, then the vast slaughters of the 20th century. Societies confront loss on a scale that makes individual, elaborate mourning impossible. Public memorials, monuments, and national rituals emerge to share the burden. Collective remembrance grows as private displays shrink. Historians still debate whether this truly lightens grief, simply drives it into quieter, less visible corners. You walk once more down a late Victorian, early Edwardian high street. Funeral notices still hang in windows. Undertakers still ply their trade. But the air feels different. The rigid architecture of sorrow has begun to soften. Not because grief has vanished, but because people have started to imagine it might not. Remind yourself you are here, in this moment, with your own bed, your own walls, your own present tense, which deserves rest. The world of factories and fog, of rigid dress codes and stern voices, now feels distant. What remains close is the quiet certainty that love has always tried to outlast fear, that every generation has sought ways to remember, and to go unhold that thought like a small, warm stone in your hand, smooth, solid, simple, no rules attached, as the final words settle. Imagine the lights in your room dimming, screens fading to black, outside sounds melting into a gentle hum. Let your eyes grow heavier, or simply pretend they are, feeling the muscles around them relax. There's nothing to fix, nothing to decide. History can look after itself for a while. Your only task now is to drift. If sleep comes, let it arrive quietly, like a kind visitor with no demands. If it doesn't come right away, that's all right too. You can simply lie there, breathing, letting your thoughts wander over safer, calmer images, as if walking through a quiet garden. This is your time to loosen your grip on the day and let your mind find quieter ground. End of script.